On today's World Insight with Tianwei, HarmonyOS unveiled, Huawei's new cross-platform operating system amid the U.S. clampdown on the company. Could it catch on? And a big strain on cross-Strait relations. What will it take to put ties back on track? Here is our host, Tianwei.
Hello and welcome to World Insight, coming to you live on CGTN. Let's begin our show with Harmony. The word took on a new meaning today as Chinese company Huawei unveiled on Friday its highly anticipated homegrown operating system, Hongmeng, or known in English as HarmonyOS. Huawei and its smartphone users, many believe, now have a backup plan for Android. It offers critical reassurance at a time when the telecom giant from China is facing a U.S. clampdown. Before we turn to our panelists about what it really means, take a look at, quote, the Harmony.
An armor of protection from the trade war. On Friday, Huawei officially unveiled its own operating system, HarmonyOS, at its developer conference in Dongguan. It is currently not meant to replace Android on Huawei smartphones, but CEO Richard Yu said that if it becomes a forced necessity, HarmonyOS is ready to go. Almost 3 months after Huawei ended up in a U.S. government blacklist, the announcement was a welcome relief. The company said HarmonyOS is the world's first microkernel-based distributed OS for all user scenarios. But the big question is, does HarmonyOS have mass appeal? Almost all smartphones in the world are running on either Android or iOS operating systems, with the lion's share for Android at nearly 86% of the market. Alternatives had emerged and disappeared over the years, even from big players like Microsoft and BlackBerry. Will HarmonyOS bring greater harmony to the tech world, or is it a sign that companies no longer rely on the global supply chain? What does this tell us about the future of mobiles?
Huawei's HarmonyOS, or operating system. What's in the new operating system? Let's ask our panelists, and what's going to be its impact on the overall competition. In our Beijing studio, Andy Mok, a non-resident fellow from the Center for China and Globalization. Also in our Beijing studio, long time no see, Jay Huang, founding partner of J-Stone Capital and the former managing director of Intel China. In Boston, joining us from the U.S., Roger Antner, who is the founder and the lead analyst at Recon Analytics. Gentlemen, welcome to our program. I want to go to the Chinese guest sitting here in the studio first. Andy, what do you say about HarmonyOS? According to the press conference, how significant will it be, and in what format will it be available to us?
Well, I think that this new OS is potentially incredibly important. It has the potential to change everything. And here's why. Because it is designed for the Internet of Things. And what that means is that there will be 100 billion, more than 100 billion devices connected to the Internet. When we look at 4G, there are several billion people connected. So this will potentially change everything. And I know that there's some question, because in the announcement that it was a little bit, there were not a lot of details provided. But the question in my mind is that, the way I understand it, is that it is an operating system that is able to run on any platform. So whether we're talking about televisions, smartphones,
right,
other UAVs, other devices.
Internet of Things, of course, that's what it means.
Exactly.
Jay, let me go to you. If you look at the press release, it's quite sketchy. However, to what extent does it really provide as an alternative, HarmonyOS? I noticed one word our colleague Andy just said, which is potentially. That's a very interesting word that he used diplomatically. To you, Jay, what does it say?
I think right now, I can see Harmony play an important role in the IoT domain. And the key question is whether they can replace an Android in the smartphone domain. It's unknown to me. It reports that if necessary, they may be able to do that. We need to wait and see. But historically, you look at this goal is a very aggressive ambitions. If you want to say, I have a one OS who can cross the platform, including smartphone and IoT.
Mm-hmm.
That's very challenging.
IoT meaning Internet of Things.
Exactly. That means that we have one OS and across multiple ecosystems.
Right.
Nobody in this world so far has been successfully doing that.
Not Android, not iOS either.
No. I think that they, for example, Microsoft tried to use their Windows for phone, basically cross and PC ecosystem and smartphone ecosystem, and failed miserably. And Huawei seems to suggest that using Android for IoT, the operating system is too big for Android for the IoT application.
I see.
That's why, and then they started with Harmony. So I can see Harmony play an important role in the IoT domain, but I'm skeptical to see Harmony doing both on the smartphone and IoT.
But I think Windows
I'll let
didn't
you
work.
guys clear your voice a little bit and also figure it out a bit. Andy, I'm going to come back to you.
Sure.
Let me also ask the opinions from Roger. Roger, what do you make of the comments your two Chinese colleagues just made? What do you also, how do you interpret the sketchy press release and certainly quite some interesting demonstrations at the Huawei press conference?
Well, we're in early days here. I think the project for the HarmonyOS got kicked into really high gear with the threats of President Trump to cut off the supply of updates and authentication and authorization with Google. So this is a show of strength by Huawei to the US administration that we can do this by ourselves. And by focusing on IoT, that's the low-hanging fruit where there are relatively little and few moving parts. Especially, it plays to Huawei's strength on phones, or particularly on TVs and IoT, where Huawei is a significant player in IoT and therefore controls the ecosphere. It gets, as my other colleague said, it gets a lot more complicated in phones where consumer choice plays a big role and they are hesitant to switch OSs.
I see. Andy, please, go ahead.
Maybe I can just add to that. But I think the reason why cross-platform operating systems have failed have not been for technology reasons. So Windows OS didn't succeed not because they couldn't build it, but because customers and enterprises didn't adopt it. The second point I want to make is that Linux is very big, meaning that it's about 26 million lines of code. And what that means is that it's bulky. It's also, that creates security problems as well. And this microkernel concept that Harmony is using is actually a revolutionary breakthrough that makes it not only more secure, but I think really a more able operating system. Google has a similar one as well, but they've never commercialized it. The last point
What was the one that Google had?
I think it's called Fuchsia.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Okay.
But the last point I want to make is that I said potentially, because again, I know that there's not a lot of detailed information, but my understanding is that Huawei could apply it to smartphones. And in fact, there have been unnamed sources that have said that Huawei will launch a HarmonyOS smartphone in Q4 of 2019.
It's very interesting, isn't it? That's the key issue here, whether the Huawei smartphones, because Huawei at this moment is the second largest smartphone manufacturer in the world following Samsung, but certainly in front of Apple at this point. But what's going to happen to the smartphone? That's the interesting question about the smartphones and the pressure Huawei is receiving from the United States regarding the technologies being used in smartphones. Earlier, I talked to Ren Zhengfei, Huawei's founder and CEO. He predicted a revenue loss amid a U.S. ban on Huawei and how long the company will regain momentum, particularly among smartphones. Let's listen in to what he said then.
In the coming years, our production capacity may decrease and our sales revenue will be about $30 billion lower than forecasted. In 2019 and next year, our annual sales revenue will be about $100 billion, but maybe in 2021 we will regain our growth momentum and provide even better services to society.
There we go. Ren Zhengfei earlier talked to me in an exclusive interview in discussion with others as well. Jay, go to you. What does it take for an operating system on a smartphone? Of course, I'm talking about popular smartphones, not smartphones that nobody's going to choose, but popular smartphones to be successful.
I think the number one is the ecosystem.
What do you mean by ecosystem?
Ecosystem.
Explain in plain words to our audience.
Ecosystem means, and then your OS will be adopted by multiple phone vendors,
Yeah.
not just by yourself. And also your applications will be running on your OS. And also the consumers would like to use it.
Those app producers would love to use your platform, which is the operating system.
Exactly. Write applications and then for you, not just for iOS, for Apple, or for Android. And that has for you. And then the end user would like to use it. Those are the, say, necessity and for an OS and then to break into build his own ecosystem. That's a lot of challenges, and also particularly for Huawei. He, as a phone vendor, also has his own OS. And then he said, how can you convince the other phone vendors use your OS instead of Android if Android is available? If Android is not available, that's a completely different story. Historically, we see Nokia has its own OS called Symbian. It's extremely difficult for Nokia to convince other phone vendors to use Symbian as their operating system.
Right.
We already see that's another failure.
Very interesting, the case study you just raised. But Roger, if you look at Huawei's phone, where it's popular in China, certainly, no doubt about that. And many Chinese these days even prefer Huawei phone over, let's just say, Apple and Samsung due to circumstances. It's also popular in some of the large areas of developing world, Southeast Asia, Africa, for example. Yes, indeed. And also, it is popular in even Europe, in some countries. United States, very difficult as a result of the political reasons. So, Roger, given the size in which Huawei phone market has conquered so far, will a Harmony operating system, once being tested on its own phone, Huawei phone, the users going to be able to use that, would love to use that, or it's going to be a very complicated process? Roger, your thoughts?
I think it will be the further away we go from China, both geographically and culturally, the more difficult it will get. I think in China, Huawei will be able to attract the developer community and the customer base for this to be quite successful. But the further we move away from China, the more dependent and more preferential they are towards either Android or iOS. So at a best case scenario, what Huawei can look at is a iPhone and iOS type scenario. Very strong in the whole market, but the further away you go from the US, also Apple gets weaker and weaker. So Huawei faces the same thing. One of the big steps that Huawei has to do here is not only base its operating system on open source, but make their operating system open source as well, and make it non-proprietary, so that, as my other colleague said, that more application providers will use it, and especially more phone manufacturers will use it.
Right.
But even then, it's an uphill battle.
Yes, it is an uphill battle, if it is a battle eventually. Andy, it's already open source. That's Huawei claimed so far. Of course, we haven't seen how Harmony would really operate at the press conference, but certainly we're going to see some so-called smart screen products of Huawei later in the year going to use specifically the HarmonyOS.
Yep. No, and that's exactly right. So that's why if I were Google, I would be very, very scared right now, because Android is primarily a smartphone operating system, whereas Harmony is positioned as an IoT. And what that means, it's IoT includes smartphones, but smartphones do not include IoT.
Right.
So I think this is potentially huge. Now, I think two very key points here we need to...
It really depends on how you understand it, whether the Internet of Things now already exceeds in importance than the smartphones, or the other way around, I guess.
Yeah. Well, but yes. But I think the Internet of Things is developing. But I think the other thing that's very key is that the OS is not a consumer purchase. So I would not go and say, I want to use iOS or I want to use Android. The key audience are the app developers.
That's right.
And they only care about two things. How much money can they make, and how easy is it to write an app? So iOS, even though, as Jay said, it's integrated with Apple hardware, you can't use iOS on any other hardware. But Apple has made it so profitable for app developers to develop apps for the iOS ecosystem.
This is a very interesting discussion, because all we discuss are about technologies. Our discussion is free from politics yet, including about app developers. But there is an element of politics and geopolitics over here. So what's likely would be the arguments from different sides of the geopolitics for the app developers if they look at their choices. Jay?
I think if I'm an app developer, so first of all, I write an application. How many users can use it?
That's right. Well, Chinese market certainly is big.
Yes, but the existing customers are all based on the, either Android
or iOS.
Or iOS. And also why the developer first choice is always iOS is because of the iOS, because it's hardware and software all in one.
That's right.
So lots of less compatibility issues than Android. So then the second choice is on Android. Now you may or may not have a third one. He's going to say, hey, how big this consumer base is.
That's right.
And then you may put it at the third priority.
And how easy it is for the app developers to be able to use these technologies.
Yeah. At Intel, we saw the similar things when Intel tried to use this hardware architecture like x86 into smartphones. He literally have to pay developers to develop a software based on their ecosystem. That's right. And that's an attempt. It's also failed.
It's a fascinating topic, gentlemen, even from the technological perspective. But besides that, there is a much more discussion, really, that we really now need to dig into about the geopolitics side, about the economic side of the HarmonyOS. For example, this event, what we discussed today, Huawei launched HarmonyOS, is only one hint as to how divided our world is today, because for a smartphone manufacturer, it now realizes it has to develop its own OS system in order to exist and continue its business. So would there be a domino effect? Jay, that's what I'm thinking, that all important manufacturers that are getting their important components, technologies, and also parts from the global supply chain. Now, when they look at geopolitics and think, oh my God, I need to have many alternative plans. What if this? What if that? What kind of world is that? I have to ask you, Jay, about that, because it's hard for me to imagine.
My interpretation about Harmony's announcement basically says, look, today I have IoT OS. And if you allow me to use Android, I'll be happy to continue using Android.
That's right.
But if you don't allow me to use Android, I may have a backup plan. I think also in the chip side of it, we see the similar things. A lot of the companies, if today they're using imported chips, they feel very nervous. They all want a backup plan as what if happens.
But that means enormous amount of increase of cost because you have to put in a lot of R&D into all of this.
Correct, but there is no alternatives. And then what if your supply chain gets shut down?
That's right.
Your business goes down. So everybody is nervous. So I see this as actually probably unexpected consequences for this trade war. This actually stimulate and then China's development on the chip side.
But Roger, if you look at that, it's not just between China and the United States. Now we are seeing also between Japan and South Korea, as semiconductor coming from Japan, very popular, used in products put out by Samsung and other South Korean companies. So we're likely to see wildfires really burning the whole grassland. Roger.
Well, we're seeing some disintegration of the integrated global supply chain that we have seen. And we are seeing
it's not some. May I, sir? Because if you look at the U.S. and China, it's the first and the second largest economy in the world. If you look at Japan and South Korea, it's the 11th and something like the 5th largest economy in the world. It's not just some, but rather big stuff we're talking about here. Roger, let me go to you first, and then Andy, I'll come back to you. Roger, go ahead.
Oh, I completely agree with you that we're seeing the global supply chain separating slowly but surely, and redundancies put into. In the end, the consumer will pay for it because we will have more and more redundant capabilities in more countries. And development will probably slow down. So this is quite a worrying sign.
Do you think more competition, Andy?
Well, I disagree because, I mean, what I see happening...
about what?
Well, so the geopolitical question here is that this really is not that big a deal. Because what's going on here is that, yes, the U.S. and China are the two largest economies of the world, but this decoupling between the U.S. and China is, in fact, isolating and ostracizing the United States. Because there are other technology companies, NXP in the Netherlands, there are other European companies, South Korean companies, Japanese companies. And I think what the U.S. is doing is actually very, very short-sighted in that by forcing companies like Huawei to have Plan Bs, they're alienating and ostracizing themselves. So the U.S., if this continues, will end up being an island. And let's not forget that even though the U.S. is the biggest economy in nominal terms, all the growth is in China, it's in Africa. And we see this leapfrog effect now as well with smartphones, the next generation, that Africa, India, these are the places where the growth is happening. And the U.S., I think, is cutting itself off from that.
I'm not going against your argument, but if you look at the United States, still largest economy in the world, if you look at some of the biggest technologies regarding the tech industry particularly, it is still holding most of the IPs as we speak. Of course, there are other alternatives, but that is still a reality. Jay, I want to go to you also about your analysis. Now, this is what's happening, whether you like it or not. So the question really is, what does it mean for all the others? And this is only one area that we talk about, which is OS, operating system. Probably is one of the small component of the whole global supply chain. But this could happen to a lot of different industries, whether it's electronics technologies or biotechnologies or any kind. Of course, we want to contain this, the so-called war, but nobody knows. That's the issue.
I have to beg to differ with Andy on this one. I'll give you a live example. We invested in a startup company, and they design house in China. He outsourced their chip into Korea.
I see.
Suddenly, Korea has impacted because Japan shut down the supply. So he has to scrambling, find another foundry, maybe inside of China. I think this is happening in real time. And then I think that previously the assumption is, and then we're in free trade. And then in a comparative and advantages, and then you do where you think is the best, and then it give you quality, prices, etc. Now we have to put the geopolitical into consideration when we supply chain.
And that's the uncertainty, because no business could decide the geopolitics.
Exactly. Like another company we invested, previously they say, I only need to build a factory in China. Now I need to build a second factory outside China because this tariff war between China and the U.S. And then that's absolutely add on more cost, and then for everybody.
I see. Before we go, I do have one question, a very specific one about Huawei. That is, almost 90 days ago, the U.S. Commerce Department put Huawei, quote unquote, on the so-called entity list. And then, after a few days, after complaints from tech companies, it said that people and companies can apply for exemptions. Now, the exemption certificate lasts 90 days, which would fall on the 20th of this month in August. So at this moment, we see already Huawei providing an alternative plan to its users and its audience. So what does that mean, Andy, if you look at this trade war and its impact on companies' strategies?
Well, I think for American technology companies like the Qualcomms that are supplying, the Microns, that are supplying chips and other hardware to Huawei and companies like them, they are in a very, very difficult position because they need the revenue. Like upwards of 50% of their revenue comes from China.
I see.
And these are very R&D intensive businesses. So if they lose this revenue, they will not be able to fund their R&D, which means that sooner or later they will lose their technology leadership. And I think because of this dynamic, this is really undercutting the China hawk's position in the United States.
Well, we'll see how things would develop, whether they really listen to the voices of the business community. Roger, your thought?
I think what we're seeing here is both the problems when you're getting caught in the political crossfire as a business. And while I agree that the impact on U.S. businesses could be quite severe in the short term, we could also see then that the supply chain diversifies away from China, and we have a lose-lose for everybody. So that would be the big danger, and the best thing would be if we all get along and we can settle the trade dispute and don't need to replicate all the capabilities in factories and supply chains.
Well, Jay, very briefly before we go.
We all would be better off with it.
Yeah, I don't want to cut you off, but before we go, we only have 30 seconds left. Jay, could you?
I think there will be some impact to American suppliers and like a chip company, etc. That's on the impact would be different on individual basis. On the bigger scheme, it's way to see how big the really impact it is.
But at least today, Huawei has given its answer. It is trying to provide an alternative to its users.
Correct. This is what I call the unexpected consequences of this trade war.
Thank you so much, Jay Wang, Andy Mok, and Roger Antner. Really appreciate it. You're watching World Insight, still to come on our program today. A big strain on cross-Strait relations. What will it take to put ties back on track? That's up for a discussion right after this break. Welcome back. You're still watching World Insight with me, Tian Wei. The program coming to you live from Beijing. Let's turn to the latest on cross-Strait relations, meaning what's happening between China's mainland and Taiwan. Film houses from the Chinese mainland declined to take part in Taiwan's annual Golden Horse Film Festival this year. China's State Film Administration announced on Wednesday the award ceremony will be held in November with 148 films up for the awards, a big drop from 228 last year. Films from the Chinese mainland grabbed most of the major awards last year, but the award night went sour after some of the awardees from Taiwan trying to deliver a speech supporting so-called independence of Taiwan. Starting August, the Chinese mainland has stopped issuing individual travel permits to Taiwan too, citing hostility toward the mainland. cross-Strait relations took a turn for the worse ahead of the 2020 election in Taiwan Island. So, are the Chinese mainland's measures enough to show its commitment to the One China principle? Let's go to our panelists. In Taipei, we are joined by Joanna Lei, a former legislator who's currently the Chief Executive Officer of the Changhua 21st Century think tank. Joanna, welcome to our program. I understand there is a storm in Taiwan. Thank you for still joining us through the video. Also joining us in Beijing, Victor Gao Zhigai, who is a current affair commentator. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Also joining us, he is the Center for China and Globalization. So, Joanna, the latest response that you have toward the two measures the mainland government has decided, one about the film festival, the other about the travel.
Well, certainly there are very strong reactions, primarily from the local individuals, less so from the government officials, because the private individuals understand the real consequences and the true meaning of these two new decisions made by mainland China. On the individual traveler side, it's estimated to be impacting or reducing the number of visitors from 200,000 to 700,000, making an economic impact of 6 billion to 21 billion NT dollars for the local economy, especially in the service side. So local individuals do understand the impact. And on the film side, while there are some younger generation filmmakers, they are expressing a very strange reaction, but the major film industry do understand that the Golden Horse is very unique in the sense that it started from 1961. It's one of the oldest and most prestigious Chinese language film festivals. And once you don't have mainland China participants, its position and its significance will definitely be reduced.
We understand that this moment is not just those coming from China's mainland, but also from Hong Kong that has already quit attending the Golden Horse Film Festival held in Taiwan. Now, when we talk about the tourists, I just want to add to what Joanna had just said, that more than 11 million tourists visited Taiwan in the year 2018, a record high, that is. Out of the total, some 2.7 million came from the Chinese mainland, although a far cry from the 4.18 million mainland visitors in 2015. They still make up about 1 in every 4 tourists in Taiwan, to say the least. Besides tourism, there are a lot of other things that very much link the economy in Taiwan and that from China's mainland. Go to you, Victor. Many would wonder, why would the authority in Beijing make the decision? Would that mean Beijing is willing to cut ties with Taiwan?
No, I think, first of all, the decision is a major one. The impact on the tourist industry in Taiwan will be huge. After all, individual travelers account for more than 50% of the mainland visitors to Taiwan right now on an annualized basis. So the impact on the tourist industry will be very, very big. Now, why the central government in China makes that decision, I think this is highly expected, and it's very logical, because the bottom line in China is that no one should be encouraged to pursue one country, one country, one Taiwan, or two countries on the two sides of the Taiwan Strait.
Right.
Wrong policy. There is only one policy, that is, there is only one China, and both sides of the Taiwan Strait belong to the one China. So if the Taiwan authorities want to deviate from that principle, there will be consequences. And that decision, even though it's a very major decision, will be just one of the decisions yet to come.
Right.
So be prepared for more major initiatives from central government here in China.
I see. If you look at the consequences, let's also look at the numbers regarding the film industry. The Chinese mainland is the world's second biggest theater movie market so far, with 60 billion yuan made at the box office in the year 2018. More than half of that came from Chinese films, with nearly a 38 billion yuan take. Taiwan's movie market, on the other hand, is one that's raked in nearly 2.2 billion yuan at the box office, with less than 10% of that from the Taiwanese films. So you see the numbers over there. Joanna, this is not a number competition, rather. This is a principle competition, I see, as in your earlier argument. Now, how to make sure there's going to be a good balance? On the one hand, the attitudes are being made clear. That is, there's only one China, and Taiwan is part of China. All the policy are pointing toward that direction. But on the other hand, to also maintain the critical ties between Taiwan and the mainland, and the critical ties of people-to-people exchanges, the critical ties of economic cooperation. How to see that fine balance, Joanna?
Well, I think in the way you framed the question, it is very clear that our current dilemma stems from the DPP regime. Taiwan, since she took office, refused to recognize 92 consensus or anything with regard to a new position between her existing independence position to where the two sides may move towards. So it is critically important that in November, this Golden Horse will be a very local event, and that may send a message to a lot of Taiwanese that whether you want to be a very isolated, marginalized economy or culture, or you would like to embrace a bigger world, and that will perhaps make some changes in the decision of January 11th, which is the next general election. If Taiwan continues to hold office, I don't see any improvement from our current dilemma.
Now what we're seeing on the screen are some of the earlier excerpts of movies and also filmmakers that have won the Golden Horse Award last year and the years earlier. Now we see, Victor, this year though, there's going to be the Golden Rooster Award exactly taking place at the same time when the Golden Horse Award is going to be held, and it's going to be held in the city of Xiamen, right across the Taiwan Strait from Taipei. So it seems that there's going to be much more competition over there under the Golden Rooster rather than the Golden Horse. So what does it say, in a way, to the critical issue that the three places, China, Hong Kong, China's mainland, Hong Kong, Taiwan, and also Macau, need to be connected when it comes to a bigger China cultural concept, so that we'll see 100 flowers or more blossom?
Actually, I fully agree with you, and the greater connectivity there will be in the cultural exchange field, the better. However, I think we need to send the right message to the people and the regime in Taiwan. That is, for example, if there are some people promoting two China or one China, one Taiwan policy, mainland China or the central government here in China will not tolerate. And whatever measures that are taken to send a strong message to Taiwan will be perceived as reinforcing the one country or one China principle, and eventually it will work to the greater benefits of the people in mainland China or Taiwan or Hong Kong and Macau, because otherwise people will be divided as to where the central government would stand on such important issue as the one China principle.
I see. All of this is happening with the backdrop, Joanna, of the U.S. arms sales to Taiwan, of the current administration in Taiwan trying to kowtow into interests in Washington and try to bring as much support from there as possible. So what kind of message do you think, particularly at the time when China and the U.S. are also in the process of so-called trade war, the mainland authority is trying to send through these two gestures, as we just mentioned?
Well, certainly this is something that I have always maintained that would be the worst possible position for Taiwan, that is to be merely a chip used by the United States, or merely a way of getting back to the United States if some tension continues to arise. I'd like to just add that the current decisions, the two decisions, no individual travelers, also affected the business relationship, because business travelers in the past have used the individual travel pass to come to Taiwan to conduct business meetings, negotiations, and that will come into a halt or have a more difficulty in the years to come. So that will have a bigger effect in the economy. However, it is even more important that there seems to be a general consensus that the Taiwan situation is also linked with the Hong Kong civil unrest. And the Hong Kong civil unrest may be linked to the U.S. Manipulation behind. So all of this just reminds us in Taiwan that our worst possible position is to be chipped by the United States, and we should try to maintain as much free negotiation possibilities with mainland China, and as well as much goodwill as possible for human interaction, people-to-people exchange, cultural, and tourism.
Thank you so much for the two of you, Joanna Lei and Victor Gao Zhikai. Really appreciate it. Thank you. And that is all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more, try to find us World Insight CGTN into your search engine or check out our YouTube channel. You can also follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Sina Weibo. From me, Tian Wei, and everyone on the World Insight team, thanks for watching. And tune in again next time for more insights across China and around the world. The weekend is here. Go and have a great one, everyone. Bye for now.